The American Civil War occurred between 1861 and 1865. The war was fought between the northern United States, which was loyal to the Union, and the southern United States that had seceded from the Union. The war is one of the most studied and talked about events in U.S. history. The total amount of deaths ranges between 600,000 and 1 million people, making it by far the deadliest conflict in United States history. Technologically, the war has been seen as a critical midway point between the Napoleonic Wars and World War I. It is often considered the first modern war in terms of technology and communications. The telegraph, for instance, played a huge role, as leaders such as President Lincoln could communicate almost instantaneously with his commanders in the field, who were often several hundred miles away. Railroads also played an important factor, as huge amounts of soldiers could be mobilized to a battle very quickly. It should be noted that while railroads were extremely important, many divisions still utilized horses, wagons, carts, and marches to move supplies and soldiers. Weapons and equipment also saw improvements. The Gatling gun, for instance, could fire rounds off at high rates of fire. Some of the greatest technological advances occurred at sea. In the mid-19th century, warships made out of wood became increasingly vulnerable to more powerful cannons and explosives. As a result, British and French naval forces began to research ships that were protected by iron and steel armored plates. The French launched the first ironclad in 1859. The Union launched its first steam-powered ironclad in 1862. The name of the ship was the USS Monitor. The Confederates also launched an ironclad of their own, the CSS Virginia. The two would meet in battle in what would become the first combat between two ironclad warships, and I will cover that in a later lecture. The causes of the Civil War have been much debated and discussed. Previously, some historians looked to find different causes for the conflict, and made the argument that slavery was not the primary cause. This has largely been discounted by modern historians, especially in the 21st century, and slavery is now seen as the major cause of the war. States' rights were also an important issue, and slavery was one of the main factors why Confederate states in the South advocated for states' rights. This is not to say slavery was the only issue. It certainly was not. The United States was undergoing massive changes to its economy, political institutions, and society. This had the effect of further fragmenting the South and North. Slavery was just the issue that pushed the country over the edge, and specifically how to deal with slavery in the Western territories. Now, it is important to note that the issue of slavery was nothing new. Tensions had been on the rise several decades before the Civil War even began. Some historians will trace this back to 1803. And the Louisiana Purchase. The United States acquired a vast amount of territory from France. The biggest issue involving the purchase was slavery, and really the future of slavery. In other words, there were bitter disagreements in terms of whether slavery would be allowed or not allowed in these areas. All of this culminated in the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The idea was to appease both northern and southern states. As part of the compromise, Maine was admitted into the United States as a free state, while Missouri would then be admitted as a slave state. In addition, the agreement prohibited slavery in the unorganized territory of the Great Plains, which you can see here in dark green. Slavery would then be permitted in the Arkansas Territory, this light blue area. Historians have noted that the Missouri Compromise really didn't solve the overall issue of slavery, and only helped postpone war. Tensions began to worsen further in the 1850s with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which effectively allowed the proposed state of Kansas to decide on its own whether or not slavery would be permitted. As a result of this act, slaveholders and abolitionists poured into Kansas, and not surprisingly, a series of violent confrontations broke out. The situation grew even more chaotic as two rival governments claimed to be the legitimate governing body in Kansas. One side claimed the state was free, and the other side permitted slavery. The President of the United States just before the outbreak of the Civil War was James Buchanan. Buchanan has been heavily criticized by historians for his failure to address the issue of slavery and the secession of the southern states. He is generally considered to be one of the worst presidents in United States history. Buchanan was elected in 1856 and announced that he would serve only one term. This meant a new president would be elected in 1860. On May 18, 1860, at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, Abraham Lincoln won the nomination for the Republican Party. The Republican Party was founded in the northern states 6 years earlier in 1854. The party was established by forces mainly opposed to the expansion of slavery. In relatively short order, the Republican Party became the main opposition to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party elected Stephen Douglas as their candidate with support of the Northern Democrats. Delegates from 11 slave states in the South walked out of the Democratic Convention. They opposed some of Douglas's positions and instead nominated their own pro-slavery candidate, incumbent Vice President John Breckinridge. Yet another candidate emerged, John Bell, who was nominated by the Constitutional Union Party. Douglas and Lincoln would compete for votes in the North, while Breckinridge and Bell would compete for votes in the South. On November 6, 1860, Lincoln was elected as the 16th president. He was the first Republican president in U.S. history, and his victory was entirely due to huge support in the North and West. Not a single ballot was cast for him in 10 of the 15 southern slave states. In the end, Lincoln won 180 electoral votes, compared to 123 electoral votes for all of his opponents combined. As a result of the election, secessionists in the South began to make plans to leave the Union before Lincoln even took office in March of 1861. On December 20, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to leave the Union, adopting an ordinance of secession. By February 1, 1861, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas had all seceded. In that same month, 6 of these states declared themselves a sovereign nation, the Confederate States of America. Other slaveholding states refused to leave the Union, at least for the moment. President Buchanan and President-elect Lincoln refused to recognize the Confederacy, declaring it illegal. This would lead to the first battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Fort Sumter, and we will get to that in the next video.